At a Labor Day family lunch, my son-in-law, Rob, looked me dead in the eye and told me I was useless, just Arthur's pretty wife, and that he was selling my home. He even suggested a retirement home. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. Then I mentioned some paperwork Arthur left regarding the company's true ownership. Rob's face went white. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The scent of roasted turkey, fresh baked corn casserole, and my mother's famous pecan pie usually filled my home with comfort and anticipation on Labor Day. This year, the familiar aromas felt like a fragile shield against the encroaching silence that had settled in the house since Arthur died 7 months ago. I had spent the entire morning in the kitchen, carefully orchestrating each dish, not just for my family, but as a quiet tribute to Arthur. He had loved these meals, loved the way the house brimmed with life. Each precise measurement, each carefully arranged serving dish, was a small act of defiance against the emptiness he left behind, a way to keep his memory in our shared life alive. This house, these traditions, were our legacy. My son-in-law, Robert, or Rob as everyone called him, shattered the delicate peace the moment he sat down at the dining table. He surveyed the feast before him with a dismissive glance, his lips pursed in a familiar gesture of disapproval. "Ellie," he began, pushing a spoonful of gravy around his plate. "This gravy is a little thin, isn't it?" Unfunny. "And these potatoes, a bit lumpy. You usually do better." His tone was not an observation but a pronouncement, delivered with the self-important air he'd adopted since Arthur's passing and his subsequent takeover of Arthur and Ellie Enterprises. My daughter Charlie flinched beside him. "Dad loved her cooking, Rob," she mumbled, barely audible, her eyes darting between me and her husband, a familiar anxiety tightening her features. It was the only defense she offered, a whisper against Rob's booming authority. Before I could even respond to his critique, Rob abruptly shifted the conversation. He turned to Charlie, ignoring me completely. "So, darling, I've scheduled that realtor appointment for next Tuesday afternoon. You'll be free, won't you?" My fork clattered against my plate, the metallic ring sharp in the sudden quiet. Realtor appointment? My mind raced, trying to grasp the implication. He caught my eye, a glint of smug satisfaction in his gaze. "Oh, right. I suppose I should mention it to you, Ellie. We're putting the house on the market." My voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady, though a tremor ran through my hands, hidden under the tablecloth. "This is my home, Robert," I stated, my eyes fixed on his. "You can't just decide to sell it." He met my stare with a patronizing smile. "Ellie, please, be reasonable. This house is an enormous financial burden on Arthur and Ellie Enterprises. It's a drain on company capital. We need to liquidate this asset." The way he spoke, as if my home, my sanctuary, was merely an item on a balance sheet, enraged me. Arthur and Ellie Enterprises, a name that spoke of our shared dreams and partnership, now a weapon in his hands. "A financial burden?" I countered, my voice rising slightly. "I pay the property taxes personally. It has never been a burden on the company, and even if it were, this is my home." Rob simply chuckled, a cold, dismissive sound. "Yes, well, that's all going to change. We've been looking into some excellent independent living options for you. Sunset Gardens, for example. Lovely community, lots of activities." My breath hitched. Sunset Gardens. It was where people went to live out their final days, not a vibrant, thriving 63-year-old woman with decades of life left. "Independent living," he repeated, as if it were a privilege, not a cage. "I'm 63, Robert, not 90, I snapped, indignation flaring. "I don't need a retirement community." Rob scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Ellie, you need a reality check. You've been playing the role of the family's housekeeper since Arthur died. Cooking, cleaning, ironing my shirts, it's all you know how to do. Let's be honest, you were only Arthur's pretty wife. You barely stepped foot in the office before he passed. You contribute nothing to the company now, and frankly, this house is a relic we can't afford to maintain." His words, delivered with such cold precision, felt like a physical blow. The years of managing our home, raising our daughter, supporting Arthur's ambitions, every selfless act of love and partnership, reduced to housekeeper and pretty wife. He saw me as nothing more than a domestic accessory, a decorative, obsolete item. My vision blurred for a moment, the vibrant colors of the feast fading into a dull haze. My hands, still hidden, trembled uncontrollably, but I forced my voice to remain steady, icy calm. "And when am I expected to leave?" I asked, the question itself a surrender I hated. Rob, visibly pleased by my apparent capitulation, leaned back in his chair. "Packed by the end of the month. We'll have the sale close quickly." Under the table, a warm hand found mine and squeezed. It was Beatrice, B., Arthur's former secretary, who had insisted on joining us for lunch. Her touch was a lifeline, a silent promise of support in the suffocating silence that followed Rob's pronouncement. It was then that a flicker of something ignited within me, a spark that had been dormant since Arthur's death. The despair gave way to a quiet, burning resolve. I looked at Rob, whose smugness had returned in full force. "I suppose," I began, my voice clear and deliberate, "I should make an appointment to see you at the office first thing tomorrow morning." Rob frowned, his brow furrowing slightly. "Why, what for?" His confidence wavered for a split second. "Oh, just some paperwork," I replied, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. Paperwork that my husband left regarding the true ownership structure of Arthur and Ellie Enterprises. The effect was immediate. Rob's face drained of color, his jaw slackening. "What are you talking about? What paperwork?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharp, tinged with panic. I simply met his gaze, my smile widening. "You'll find out tomorrow, Robert." I rose from the table, gathering plates with methodical care, the clatter of porcelain, a stark contrast to the sudden tension in the room. Bee stood up to help me, her presence a silent act of solidarity. As we walked towards the kitchen, Rob's voice, now desperate, echoed behind us. "She's bluffing. There's nothing, Ellie. You're bluffing." Once in the sanctuary of the kitchen, the porcelain clattering softly on the counter, I finally let my hand shake. The tears that had threatened to spill now welled, blurring the familiar space. Bee placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're going to fight, aren't you, Ellie?" she asked softly. I looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes. 38 years. 38 years of building a life, a company, a legacy, all with Arthur. He wouldn't have left me defenseless. He wouldn't have allowed this. No, I wasn't bluffing. I was just getting started. The heavy oak door of Arthur's study felt like a shield closing behind me. The room filled with the scent of old books, leather, and Arthur's subtle cologne was a sanctuary. I sank into his worn armchair, the one he always occupied when wrestling with complex business decisions, and let the quiet embrace me. The anger that had simmered at the dinner table had now solidified into a cold, determined resolve. Rob's arrogance, his dismissive words, had lit a fire I hadn't known was still burning within me. I traced the smooth, cool metal of the small key that hung on a delicate chain around my neck, a habit formed in the weeks after Arthur's passing. It was a tangible link to his final, whispered advice, delivered from his hospital bed just days before he left me. "You'll need to be patient, Ellie," he'd said, his voice raspy, his eyes holding a familiar twinkle despite the pain. "Let them all underestimate you. It's your greatest advantage." I understood then that he knew what was coming, knew the sharks would circle. He had prepared me, not just with words, but with a safeguard. Rising from the armchair, I moved to the large landscape painting above Arthur's desk, a sweeping view of the Montana mountains, a place we had dreamed of visiting together. With practiced ease, I pushed the heavy frame aside. Behind it, not hidden by an elaborate mechanism, but by a simple, unassuming panel, was a small, built-in safe. The key on my neck slid into the lock, turning with a soft click. Inside, nestled amongst a few old photographs and Arthur's grandfather's watch, was a thick manila envelope, crisp and unblemished. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, pulling out a single document. It wasn't a complex legal tome, but a clear, concise partnership agreement dated from the very inception of Arthur and Ellie Enterprises. It declared in no uncertain terms that Arthur and I were equal partners, legally and in name, 50% for him, 50% for me. But then my eyes fell on the crucial clause, the one Arthur had so carefully ensured was there. Upon the death of either partner, full control and ownership of Arthur and Ellie Enterprises shall transfer to the surviving spouse. It was simple, unambiguous. Upon Arthur's death, Every single share, every iota of control had legally transferred to me. Ellie, not Robert. A small, grim smile touched my lips. Rob had been so quick to step into Arthur's shoes, so eager to take the reins. I had watched him, listened to his grand plans, his pronouncements about my company. I had even allowed him to move into Arthur's corner office, letting him believe he was the natural successor. After all, Arthur's advice echoed in my mind, let them all underestimate you. But I had never, not once, signed over my rights. I had simply waited, watched, and now my moment had arrived. The quiet hum of my phone broke the silence. It was Charlie. Her voice was laced with an apology, though it felt more like an attempt to smooth things over. Mom, I'm so sorry about Rob earlier. He's really stressed about the company. There's talk of a hostile takeover, and he's trying to protect us. Her words were rushed, a veneer of justification for her husband's monstrous behavior. I let her finish, then gently interrupted. Charlie, darling, I appreciate your concern, but there's something important we need to discuss. I paused, letting the silence hang. Does Rob know that I own 51% of the company? The gasp on the other end of the line was audible, followed by a stunned silence. What? Mom, what are you talking about? No, Arthur. He left you everything else, the house, his personal investments. But he always said the company was going to be for Rob, for the future of the family business. Her voice was laced with genuine shock, an unraveling of a truth she had always believed. No, Charlie, I explained, my voice calm, deliberate. Your father and I were equal partners from day one. When we started Arthur and Ellie Enterprises, we both put in the capital. We both did the work. He was the public face, yes, because in the 1980s, it was harder for a woman to be taken seriously in a leadership role. We made a strategic decision. Charlie still sounded unconvinced. But Mom, you never came to the office. You never attended meetings. Rob always said, well, he said you were just Dad's pretty wife, that you were busy with home and family. The words, echoing Rob's cruel insults, stung, but I pushed the pain aside. That's what everyone was meant to believe, sweetie, I said gently. But every important meeting, every major decision, Arthur and I discussed. Sometimes I was in the office, but usually it was after hours. He brought quarterly reports home every single weekend for 38 years. We reviewed them together, analyzed the data, planned our strategies. My name might not have been on the door, but my fingerprints were all over every success, every innovation. Then why, Mom? Charlie's voice was softer now, tinged with confusion, even a hint of respect. Why didn't you ever speak up? Why let everyone think? Because it didn't matter who got the credit, Charlie, I interrupted. As long as the work got done, as long as the company thrived, that was Arthur's and my shared vision, our legacy. Suddenly, Rob's muffled voice became audible in the background, sharp and demanding. Charlie whispered, he's asking who I'm talking to. Oh, Rob, I said, my voice firm and clear, projecting confidence I truly felt. Tell Rob, I'll see him at the office tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. He can bring the company lawyers if he wants, but it won't change anything. I hung up before Charlie could respond, the weight of the phone feeling lighter now. I walked to the window, looking out at the Lebanese maple Arthur had given me for our 10th anniversary. I remembered the year we nearly lost everything, a catastrophic loan default threatening to sink the fledgling company. We had worked tirelessly, pooling our resources, even taking a second mortgage on this very house, a gamble that paid off, saving the company and laying the foundation for our future success. This house, this tree, this company, it was all built on our shared effort, our shared love. Rob had underestimated me, just as Arthur knew he would. But tomorrow the game would change. The navy blue suit felt unfamiliar against my skin, crisp and formal, a stark contrast to the comfortable clothes I'd worn for months since Arthur's passing. But as I fastened the final button, I looked at my reflection with a new resolve. Today they wouldn't see a grieving widow, nor a doting old fool. Today they would see the businesswoman Arthur had always known me to be. I took a deep breath, adjusting the lapels, and walked out the door, the weight of the manila envelope in my briefcase, a comforting presence. The company headquarters, a sleek glass and steel edifice, rose proudly against the morning sky. I remembered sketching its initial design on a napkin years ago during one of Arthur's late-night brainstorming sessions. I had designed the lobby, the layout of the executive floor, even chosen the art. Yet the young receptionist, her face buried in a monitor, didn't even glance up as I approached her desk. "Good morning," and I said, my voice clear and firm. She looked up, startled, a blank expression on her face. "I'm here to see Robert Sterling. I'll wait in my husband's office." Without waiting for a response, I bypassed her, heading directly for the elevators, the confident stride of performance, yet it felt surprisingly natural. The elevator doors hissed open on the executive floor, revealing a scene of hushed urgency. An assistant, a young woman with wide, nervous eyes, rushed towards me. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling is in an emergency meeting with the board. They've been in there since 8 a.m. Her words confirmed my suspicions. Rob was scrambling, trying to consolidate his position before I could make my move. "I'm aware," I replied, my tone calm but leaving no room for argument. "Take me to the conference room." She hesitated, but Mr. Sterling asked not to be disturbed. I met her gaze, a small, polite smile playing on my lips. "I assure you he'll want to see me." As we walked down the polished corridor, a few familiar faces looked up from their cubicles, their expressions shifting from surprise to warmth. David Miller, the vice president of operations, a man who had started as an intern under Arthur, stopped me. "Mrs. Sterling, it's wonderful to see you. You look, well, wonderful." He squeezed my arm gently. "Is everything all right?" "Rob called this emergency meeting, something about restructuring the leadership. Quite sudden." I gave him a knowing smile. "That's precisely why I'm here, David." The assistant timidly pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. The air inside was thick with tension, hushed voices ceasing immediately. 10 pairs of eyes, including a very pale Robert Sterling, snapped towards the doorway. The silence that fell was profound, broken only by the soft click of the doors closing behind me. Rob, recovering his composure with the forced cough, stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "Ellie, you're early." His attempt at nonchalance was betrayed by the tremor in his voice. I ignored his weak attempt at control, sweeping my gaze across the table, recognizing most of the faces, old allies of Arthur. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice resonating with an authority thus I hadn't realized I possessed. "It's been too long." Richard Hayes, the oldest board member, a man with a shock of white hair and a kind face who had been a trusted friend of Arthur's for decades, immediately rose to his feet. "Ellie, my dear, it's truly wonderful to see you." He came around the table and embraced me warmly, his genuine affection a stark contrast to Rob's rigid, awkward posture. Other board members, seeing Richard's reaction, followed suit, some rising, others offering warm greetings. The small acts of respect felt like a balm after months of feeling invisible. Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, intelligent woman who headed the legal department, eventually found her voice. "Ellie, we're so glad you're here, but what brings you to the office today?" I met her gaze, then turned to Rob, whose face was now a mask of barely controlled apprehension. "I believe Rob knows," I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. "But I'd be happy to explain to everyone." I reached into my briefcase, the rustle of the manila envelope, a subtle but powerful sound in the room. Rob stood abruptly, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Ellie, perhaps this is a discussion best had in private, after the board meeting. There are matters of company policy." "Nonsense, Robert," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "This concerns everyone in the room. In fact, it directly relates to the restructuring I hear you were discussing." I looked at Richard Hayes. "Isn't that right, Richard? Rob was just about to propose some significant changes to our leadership structure?" Richard nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "Yes, Ellie, he was. Please join us. Have a seat." He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table, the one Arthur always occupied. I took it, sitting with a quiet dignity. Rob's voice was strained, bordering on a shout. "Ellie is no longer actively involved in the company. This is hardly appropriate." "Actually, Robert," I countered, my gaze piercing his, "that's precisely what we need to discuss." I pulled out the neatly stacked copies of the partnership agreement. Slowly, deliberately, I handed one to each board member, watching their faces as they skimmed the first few lines. Their expressions shifted from confusion to dawning realization, then outright shock. I saved Rob's copy for last, sliding it across the polished table towards him, its white pages a stark indictment against his false reign. "As you can see," I began, my voice clear and calm, addressing the room, "this document, dated from the company's inception, establishes Arthur and myself as equal partners in Arthur and Ellie Enterprises." I paused, letting the information sink in. "And if you refer to page 2, section 3, you'll find the succession clause. It states unequivocally that upon the death of either partner, full control and ownership of the company transfers to the surviving spouse, which in this case is me." The silence that followed was absolute, punctuated only by the rustle of papers as the board members reread the clause, their eyes wide with disbelief and understanding. Rob sat frozen, his face ashen, the color completely drained from his cheeks. His empire, built on a foundation of deceit and arrogance, was crumbling before his very eyes. A heavy, stunned silence descended upon the boardroom as the last rustle of paper died down. Each board member, their faces a tableau of shock and confusion, reread the document, their eyes lingering on the succession clause. Rob, however, didn't read. He snatched his copy from the table, his face reddening with a furious, disbelieving flush. "This is absurd," he spluttered, his voice cracking with outrage. "This is fabricated, a forgery." He crumpled the paper in his hand. Richard Hayes, ever the calm voice of reason, spoke quietly, his gaze unwavering as he met Rob's frantic eyes. "Robert, it is not fabricated. I witnessed the original signing. Arthur was very clear about his wishes when he and Ellie founded this company. He wanted her protected. Always." Rob's jaw dropped. He looked around the table, a dawning horror spreading across his features as he realized several board members, particularly the older ones, nodded in agreement. The betrayal was palpable. Sarah Jenkins, her expression grim, added, "Indeed, Robert. Your role as CEO since Arthur's passing has been as an interim CEO, serving at Ellie's discretion." The truth, stark and undeniable, hit Rob with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't the rightful heir. He was merely a temporary caretaker, a placeholder. All his grand pronouncements, his perceived authority, had been a charade. He hissed, the sound barely audible, "I've been running this company for 3 years. 3 years." I met his venomous gaze with a cool, calm expression. "And how has that been going, Robert?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. I opened a second folder, pulling out a stack of neatly organized financial reports and spreadsheets. Because from what I've observed, the company's market share has declined steadily. We've lost 3 major clients in the last 18 months, and our innovation pipeline has all but dried up. I paused, letting the damning statistics hang in the air. And then, of course, there are the suspicious transfers to offshore accounts that began exactly 2 months after my husband's death. A deathly silence fell over the room, thicker than before. Rob's face, already pale, turned from shock to a dangerous mixture of anger and finally fear. Sarah Jenkins, her eyes narrowed, slammed her hand on the table. "What transfers, Ellie?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a lawyer's instinct for malfeasance. I gave a subtle nod to B, who had been sitting quietly to my right. B, efficient as ever, rose and began distributing copies of financial records around the table. These were not my personal findings alone. I had reached out to Charles Davies, our brilliant former CFO, a man Rob had unceremoniously forced into early retirement shortly after Arthur's passing. Charles, a man of unwavering integrity, had been appalled by what he had found. "These records," I explained, gesturing to the papers B was handing out, "detail 3 separate transfers totaling nearly $7 million to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Each transfer coincides rather neatly with the purchase of a new vacation home in Aspen, a property not listed in your name, Robert, but for which the funds seem to have originated from, shall we say, unusual sources." Rob leaped to his feet, overturning his chair with a crash. "This is slander. You're manufacturing evidence, Ellie. You're just bitter because Arthur chose me to lead the company. Not you." He pointed a shaking finger at me. You're just a spiteful woman trying to ruin my reputation." "The records speak for themselves, Robert," I stated simply, my gaze unwavering. "Every transaction is documented, every date, every amount." Richard Hayes cleared his throat, his expression grave. "These allegations are serious, Robert. Very serious. An independent audit would certainly be prudent." Other board members murmured in agreement, their eyes now fixed on Rob with suspicion. Rob scoffed, a desperate, forced laugh. "You're all going to take the word of a housewife over mine? I've increased our stock value by 15% in the last year. The company is thriving." Just then the boardroom doors opened again. Charles Davies, impeccably dressed and radiating a quiet authority, stepped in. His presence, a ghost from Rob's past manipulations, brought another wave of shock to the room. "It should have been 40%, Robert," Charles stated calmly, his voice ringing with quiet indignation. He looked at me, a respectful nod. "Ellie called me a few weeks ago, concerned about some patterns she was seeing. She had a keen eye for the numbers, even from afar." Rob stared at Charles, then at me, the realization hitting him like a tidal wave. "You've been planning this for months," he accused, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and fury. "I've been watching you dismantle my husband's legacy for years, Robert," I corrected him, my voice firm. "The planning only began when I discovered you were stealing from us, from the company Arthur and I built together." Charles then dropped the final bombshell, his voice devoid of emotion. "And then there's the matter of your recent discussions with Titan Corporation, Robert. Discussions about a hostile takeover of Arthur and Ellie Enterprises. They've offered you a personal consulting contract, should the takeover be successful, worth $5 million annually. A golden parachute at the expense of everyone else in this room and every employee of this company." The boardroom erupted in outrage. Gasps, angry murmurs, and frustrated exclamations filled the air. Rob, cornered and exposed, stood frozen, his face ashen, his carefully constructed empire of lies crumbling around him. The mask of competence had finally fallen, revealing the desperate, greedy man beneath. If you're captivated by this story of betrayal and resilience, make sure you don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to stay updated on how Ellie reclaims her legacy. Your support means the world, and there's still so much more to uncover. The outrage in the boardroom was palpable, a cacophony of angry voices rising against Rob. David Miller, his face a mask of disbelief and anger, finally found his voice, addressing Rob directly. "You were going to sell us out? To Titan? Do you have any idea what Titan would do to this company? To our employees? They'd gut us, lay everyone off." Rob, visibly shaken, his face now a sickly shade of green, tried to regain some semblance of control. It's a necessary strategic move. Market conditions are changing. We need to adapt. Titan offered a good package, a chance for us to expand globally without the burden of the current infrastructure. He gestured vaguely, his words weak and unconvincing. "Burden?" I interrupted, my voice sharp, cutting through his pathetic excuses. "You call Arthur's legacy a burden? You were going to throw loyal employees, many of whom have been here for decades, out of work. You were going to dismantle everything Arthur and I built, all to line your own pockets with a consultancy fee." The raw truth of his betrayal hung in the air, undeniable. Rob sneered, a flicker of his old arrogance returning, though now laced with desperation. "Ellie, you're being emotional. This is business. Business requires tough decisions, not sentimentality." "You're right, Robert," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Business does require tough decisions, which is why my first decision as CEO is to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Rob let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You can't do that. You need board approval. You can't just waltz in here and fire the CEO." Richard Hayes, who had been listening with a grim expression, interjected, his voice firm. "Actually, Robert, she can. As the majority shareholder, Mrs. Sterling has unilateral authority to appoint or remove executives, as per the company's Articles of Incorporation. It's a clause Arthur insisted on when he and Ellie started the company." Rob sputtered, looking around the room for any glimmer of support, but found only condemnation in the faces of the board members. His eyes finally landed on mine, filled with a desperate rage. Charlie won't stand for this. We'll contest it in court. You won't get away with this. Charlie already knows, Robert, I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow. She was the one who found the deed to the Aspen property in your desk drawer at home, the one that exposed your hidden assets and confirmed your deception. My daughter, though blinded for years by love and trust, had finally opened her eyes. She had started paying attention to his late-night calls, his sudden absences, his increasingly lavish spending. The truth, once glimpsed, was impossible to ignore. Sarah Jenkins, our sharp legal mind, pounded her fist on the table. I move that we accept Ellie Sterling's return as CEO of Arthur and Ellie Enterprises, and that we authorize a full forensic audit of the company's financials, going back 3 years. David Miller immediately seconded the motion, and with a unanimous show of hands, it was approved. I rose from the head of the table, the weight of leadership settling on my shoulders, but this time it felt empowering, not burdensome. The meeting is adjourned, I stated, my voice echoing with a quiet authority. I nodded towards the executive assistant, who discreetly signaled to 2 burly security guards waiting by the door. Please escort Mr. Sterling from the premises. Rob stared at me, his face a mask of utter fury. As the security guards approached, he snarled, his voice a low hiss. You'll regret this, Ellie. You'll regret this. Then he was let out, his protests fading down the hallway. The next morning, the office felt strangely quiet, a sense of relief palpable amongst the employees. I was in Arthur's old office, now my office, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rob's number. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and bitterness. Ellie, he slurred, you think you've won? I'm at your precious house, your legacy, but it isn't it? My heart seized with a cold dread. My home, my sanctuary. I pictured him there, fueled by rage, potentially destroying everything. Charlie isn't there, Rob, I said, my voice strained, but a wave of relief washed over me. Charles had quietly informed me earlier that Charlie had moved out last night, staying with a friend. She was safe. Doesn't matter, he slurred, his voice laced with menace. All those books in Arthur's study, all those photographs, it would be a shame if something happened to them, wouldn't it? Unless you reinstate me. Give me the European division. We can make a deal, Ellie, just us. My fear quickly morphed back into a cold anger. He wasn't just a thief. He was a petty, vindictive monster. Robert, I said, my voice steely, I will press every single charge against you. Embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and now property damage. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. Behind me, Bea was already on the phone, her voice urgent as she called building security and then the police. There are sirens, I heard her whisper, and pounding at the door. I listened for a moment longer, hearing the faint wail of sirens growing closer in the background, followed by a loud, insistent pounding on a door that sounded distinctly like my front door. I hung up the phone, a grim satisfaction settling over me. The game was truly over. Bea rushed into my office, her face a mixture of relief and dismay. They got him, Ellie. Security caught Rob in the living room. He broke several windows and smashed some furniture, but they stopped him before he reached Arthur's study. My breath hitched, a wave of cold fury washing over me, followed by a profound sadness. The thought of Rob desecrating Arthur's sanctuary, the heart of our home, was almost unbearable. The police took him into custody, his drunken, belligerent protests echoing through the house. His earlier phone call, combined with the clear footage from my security cameras, provided irrefutable evidence of his destructive rampage. Later that afternoon, a tearful phone call came from Charlie. She was distraught, blaming herself for Rob's actions, for not seeing the truth sooner. None of this is your fault, Charlie, I reassured her, my voice gentle but firm. Rob made his own choices. His greed, his deception, that's on him, not you. It was important for her to understand that. Her own healing had to begin now, untainted by his poison. Despite the chaos, my mind was already racing forward. Rob's drunken threats hadn't just been about my home. He'd also hinted at Titan Corp, still pursuing a hostile takeover. I immediately called Richard Hayes, explaining the situation and the urgent need for an emergency board meeting. Richard listened calmly. "Ellie, I always knew you were the real strength behind this company," he said, his voice warm with genuine respect. Arthur was the same way in private. He never made a decision without asking, "What would Ellie say?" His words were a balm to my weary soul, a confirmation of the partnership Arthur and I had always shared, even when the world only saw him. The next 6 months passed in a blur of intense, demanding work. I plunged myself into the company, working tirelessly alongside B, Charles, and the board members who had remained loyal to Arthur's vision. We implemented the forensic audit, uncovering the full extent of Rob's embezzlement and mismanagement. The findings were damning, severely weakening his legal position. Armed with this crucial financial insight, and with a reinvigorated team, we systematically reclaimed market share, rebuilt client relationships, and most importantly, fended off Titan Corp, hostile takeover. The company, once teetering on the brink, was now stronger, more resilient, and more transparent than ever before. My home, too, underwent a transformation. The broken windows were replaced, the smashed furniture repaired or replaced. I spent weeks in Arthur's study, not just restoring it, but making it my own. A new elegant desk was placed beside his, a testament to our enduring partnership. I redecorated with lighter, more hopeful colors, and in the garden where Rob had wrought such chaos, I planted new, vibrant roses, varieties known for their resilience and ability to bloom brightly after adversity. On a warm spring afternoon, 6 months after the showdown in the boardroom, I hosted another family gathering. It was smaller, more intimate, but filled with a genuine warmth that had been missing for too long. Charlie arrived looking healthier, lighter. The lines of worry around her eyes had softened. Her divorce proceedings were nearly complete, and Rob, facing overwhelming evidence, had accepted a plea deal, which included substantial restitution to the company. Charlie walked through the garden, admiring the new roses. Their petals, a riot of deep crimson and soft peach, seemed to glow in the sunlight. "They're beautiful, Mom," she said, her voice soft. "So strong, so vibrant." She looked at me, a knowing smile touching her lips. "Like us, exactly like us." Light. Sophia and Ethan, now brighter, less burdened by the unspoken tension that had permeated their lives, laughed freely as they chased my dog across the lawn. Later, as the evening began to cool, Ethan, his eyes wide with curiosity, asked, "Grandma, can I sleep over tonight? Can I use Grandpa Arthur's telescope? And maybe look through his old notebooks?" Sophia, usually more reserved, chimed in, "Can I stay too, Grandma?" My heart swelled. This was what Arthur had wanted, a home filled with laughter and curiosity, a legacy passed down. At dinner, I raised my glass, my eyes sweeping over the faces of my family and friends, those who had stood by me. "I want to thank all of you," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "for your support, for your patience." I acknowledged my own withdrawal after Arthur's death, my retreat into grief, and the mistakes that had allowed Rob's deception to go unchecked for too long. Arthur always used to say, I continued, quoting his familiar adage, "A house is only as strong as its foundation." And he was right. I looked around the table, then to my children and grandchildren. This company, this family, this home, they all stand on foundations that Arthur and I built together, on principles of honesty, hard work, and loyalty, to foundations that endure and to new structures that rise from them. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the last guests had departed, Charlie approached me hesitantly. "Mom," she began, twisting her hands, I know it's a lot to ask, but could the children and I maybe move back home, just until I can get back on my feet?" I didn't hesitate. I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the release of months of unspoken pain and worry. "This has always been your home too, darling," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "You and the children are welcome to stay as long as you need, as long as you want." She hugged me back fiercely, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on us, for not giving up on me." Finally, I retreated to the quiet solace of my and Arthur's study. I sat at my new desk, beside his, and looked at a new photograph I'd placed there. A joyful, candid shot of Arthur and me dancing at a friend's wedding, our faces alight with laughter. A profound peace settled over me, a peace I hadn't known since Arthur passed. The future was unexpected, challenging, and entirely my own. But I was ready for it. I picked up the photograph, tracing Arthur's smiling face. "We did it, Arthur," I whispered, a gentle smile on my lips. "We saved it all."